Song of Mornius, Chapter 2, the rewritten version. Avalar Mistivir turned her back from the storm's fresh assault. Again the cruel wind blasted her little boat, thrusting her stumbling on her feet from the shelter of the windrunner's prow. In dismay she caught the taste of land on her tongue, the tang of driftweed rotting on stone. Against the sturdy port rail she clung, holding on tight as the gray slash of a faraway shore reappeared between the swells. "Impossible," she muttered. She glanced up at her boat's slackened sail and nodded. The scraps she had pieced together snapped and rippled above her head, flinging water at her face and soggy hair. "Shortened canvas, as Uncle Kurgan would want," she confirmed, "and running at an angle. So how in Hothr's bloody coral have I come so far? This squall, has it lasted all night?" Hands clenched, she glared upward at the roiling black clouds. "I am a giant," she fumed in silence. "You shall not have me." Lightning forked behind the waves, and she tensed at the jolt within her, the magic of her flesh echoing the storm's rage. She toppled to her knees, ducking her head as she crawled beneath the boom, and hauled herself up onto the helm's raised seat. Breakers crashed against the rocks port side behind her shoulder, the ominous gray smudges that she craned her neck to see. Bracing her feet at the back of the mast, she gripped the tiller, tacking once more to cut through the wind. With a flick of her head, she shook the hair from her eyes and then frantically dug for her map. In her haste to confirm what she saw, she groped with swollen red fingers into her breast pocket, where she kept the drawing safe. Outside her shirling vest, the map flew open in the driving rain. Dismayed, she watched as the fierce wind shredded through the paper, flinging it in pieces across the pitching deck. As if it were the backdrop of a nightmare, she knew the shoreline ahead, recognizing the curve of its icy bay. She had seen pictures of the looming cliffs beyond it from her lessons at Freedom Hall. The long, jagged gouges in the vertical rock were unmistakable. Ever since her childhood, she recalled, she had longed for this, to voyage to Thalas, the land that her people feared. Yet now that it was within her sight, she felt tightness in her chest, forcing her to gasp for air. Avalar stiffened where she sat, groaning as she watched the mist solidify below the distant cliffs. Now she could discern faces in the fog, remnants of ghosts from the memories she had inherited from her father. Limed in silver on the frozen sand, the specters of the lost giants swayed in the wind. She could hear their dim wails as they opened their arms to the sea. Staring, she leaned forward and hugged her legs, pressing her knees tight against her chest. "So you did see them, Father," she thought. "The ones who arrived too late. Is this why you forbade me to come here, so that I would not see them too?" She bowed her head, her tears warming her cheeks as she sensed the helplessness her father, Grevelin, had felt. She hated her magic, the power uncovering his past and the wounds he had striven to hide. Torrents slapped at her exposed face and neck, forcing her to sit up straight, rubbing at her eyes to clear her sight. The pelting rain blocked her view of the haunted shore, yet still she could see it emblazoned across her mind. Limp with grief, she succumbed to the ocean's stormy rhythm, allowing her little craft to batter her against its sides. "How did I come this far?" she asked, her body spent as she clenched the gunwale. "Dallas is farther than this, far and south from Hathrawhone." Again she froze, watching as the cliffs reappeared behind the rain, a half-circle buttress for the clouds. Visions knifed through her head. Within a wave's breaking crest, she glimpsed her father's boyhood underground, felt the magic in his flesh, the agony he had suffered as his captors turned it against him. Avalar, frowning, peered through the rain at the slaver's former homeland. Why did the humans crave our power so? She wondered. How could they hold us as they did? She loosened her grip on the rail and turned, grasping the windrunner's tiller. No haunted shore will stop me, she thought, steering hard to port and between the threatening rocks. Once my people learn what I have done, they too will come here. Our grain crops shall flow again across this land. She felt her magic reviving within her muscles, strengthened by the wind buffeting her body and the splash of seawater across her back. Through a salty blur, she saw the angry cloud shift above her head, turning like a ponderous wheel. She howled, clinging to the tiller as her boat shot sideways, buoyed up by the corkwood trimming the base of its hull. Clambering to her feet, she caught the stiff fabric flapping above her head and leaned against it, anchoring the drenched sail with her weight. A massive rock filled her vision, jutting black and ominous from its watery cradle. With her left hand still gripping the sail, she reached to grasp the tiller again with her right, to turn her little boat to starboard, to turn. The prow crumpled against the stone, water gushed around her ankles. "Sephram, help me!" Avalar clung to the mast, feeling the frigid ocean swell around her legs as her boat spun into a trough. Another wave crashed down with brutal strength, driving her into the sea. Over gray, swirling clouds of debris and sand, she tumbled with her mouth clamped shut, her heart shocked by the water's freezing cold. Struggling against the vicious drag of the undertow, she strained to swim toward the brownish foam rocking on the surface. She thrashed her arms free from her vest and kicked hard, her efforts hampered by the weight of her deer-hide leggings. A wave helped her, lifted her. She screamed when it flung her against the rock. "Father!" Rising and falling against the sharp stone, Avalar stared at the remains of her boat. Beyond its scattered wreckage rose the icy arms of Dallas's shore, already seeking her life. "Hold on!" cried a voice. She gasped as small hard fingers snagged her left wrist. Looking up, she glimpsed white feathered wings flailing above her back, then a slim elfin body descending. "No!" Avalar lashed out with her fists, battling for the hope her people needed, the call to her heart she had yearned to answer since her childhood. She knew the creature dragging at her arm. She recognized his voice, his stern eyes above his tight-lipped mouth. He meant to take her home. "You will not!" she raged. "You will not stop me! You—" Warmth filled her chest. Dazed, she gaped at the sky, feeling her limbs go numb. Hands seized her tunic from behind, gripping her at the nape of her neck and again at her waist. She heard the static crackling through his wings, his magic strengthening them to lift her up, soaking wet, and carry her ashore. Trembling hard, she collapsed on the rocky beach. "You are young, Avalar," her rescuer said, "and you have much to learn. Indeed, why in all that is magic would you battle a tempest and let it destroy your beautiful racer? Did you forget what you are?" She looked up. Before her stood Panu, the mightiest of the elfin wizards sworn to protect her people. As her father's friend, she knew he would want to take her home. Shivering, she dragged herself into a seated position, locked her arms around her knees, and glared at the winged elf. "You did," Panu continued. "Avalar, you are a giant. All you had to do was shout a command, 'Avant storm,' and it would have stilled for you." Panu. With rain splashing off her nose, Avalar watched him. He was a thin, crooked-mouthed creature whose head, whenever she stood beside him, barely reached her hips. His attire she knew well. The cream-colored vest that had fascinated her as a child with its many pockets of secret treasure, and the mysterious pouches dangling from his wide leather belt. His lean, bare arms were dripping with rain, his tunic and vest cinched low above his hips. The quilted leather that made up the back of his vest hung loose, out of the way of his muscular wings. He kept his doeskin leggings fastened in the old style, she noted, laced tight along the sides, then tucked into his fur-lined boots. Panu bowed with a flourish of his arm, and then gestured to the cliffs behind his head. "Behold," he said, the timbre of his voice ageless. Cupping her hands behind her ears, Avalar strained to hear him over the rhythmic slapping of the surf, the warbling shrieks of the wind. "These are the Drengards," he continued, "the ancient protectors of Thalas." She felt a tingle against her skull, a gentle touch of his magic to enhance her hearing. "Avalar," said Panu, "it was from this cove that your people escaped. Why would you want to return here? Do you not recall what your father went through?" "Of course I do." Hunched against the cold, she scanned the curved shoreline, hunting in vain for a way to evade him. He was Panu, the eyes and ears of the warder Sephram who protected her world. In a blink with his staff he could transfer her home. Studying him, she frowned. "The memories of my people weave forever through my magic," she said. "If I relax the muscles of my eyes, I can see the slaves waiting here, just as my father saw them when he left them behind. They are his ghosts, not mine, and they will not hinder me." "But they're not ghosts," Panu said. "I do hope you realize that." Avalar clenched her jaws. "It matters not. I can see and feel what they went through, as though I have become them myself." "This is not what you expected, is it?" Panu asked. "Avalar, I thought we had discussed this plan of yours. I tried to warn you. I told you before how foolish this was." She straightened as much as she could, her body shivering as the deluge sluiced through her hair. "But then it seemed you approved," she said. "That at last you were supporting me. You assisted me with my boat. You even gathered the cloth for my sail." "Yes." He paused, droplets flying as he shook out his wings. "I contributed your bits and pieces, the things you needed for your race boat. It was a patchwork sail, marking you as a novice. I never suspected you would attempt to bring it here." "Your staff of magic shows you the future, does it not?" she asked. "I thought you had looked, Panu. I thought you knew." Once again Avalar shivered as she glared down. Now needles of ice were pummeling her bare shoulders where she sat, smacking hard against her head and neck. "I remember how you gained your wings," she told him. "It was a mishap on Sharan caused by your magic, was it not? You made mistakes on your homeworld, Panu, and now you are making one here with me." She clenched her hands, her fingers digging into the pebbles beside her legs. "I told you after it happened," she said, "long ago when I was yet a child, but you laughed at me. You refused to even consider—" "What, that Nightbringer spoke to you?" Panu cut in. "You still think the Black Sword compels you here." Swallowing, Avalar gritted her teeth. Warm air caressed her wet skin as he stepped closer, cocking his head to see her through the rain. "The world created the sword," she said, "and now in one night I have gained Thalas, flown here on the wings of this storm. It was seen that I am meant to be here." "Avalar, my point is you could be wrong," she cut him off. "You have erred before." "Many times," Panu agreed, "and I will again, I assure you." He blinked hard and then wiped the water from his eyes with the side of his hand. "This is what I know," he said. "The humans who enslaved your people are dead, yet the power they worshipped endures. Erebos has new followers now, whole armies of magic-warped humans. How would you fight them, giant? Even if you tamed a lancer well enough to ride it, yours is the old magic, Talankai magic. Erebos' power comes from the stars. One touch of it would kill you." Avalar trembled as he caught her wrist, and the fire of his thoughts probed intrusively through her mind. Gasping, she yanked back her hand. "You seek the dance, the Talador." Panu stared at his fingers, glaring his disapproval. "You intend to reach the mountain city of Tirdan and learn the swords lore from the master swords." "What?" Panu asked as he lifted his head. "Were Grevelin's lessons not enough for you?" She returned his glower. "My father teaches how to butcher the Sunderkhan. simple snow beasts who deserve to thrive as much as we do. Except, Panu said, that they destroy entire villages. He clenched his fists, his violet eyes flaring. They devour the elves who strive to protect your people. How can you claim that they deserve? So we murder them, Avalar interjected, to defend those elves. Very well. Am I so wrong to seek a different road? On Thalos I will learn to fight with skill, sword to sword. Panu, scowling, looked toward the sea. I hope you realize how this will break your father once he discovers you are gone. You are all he has left of Alacia, your mother. Avalar, yes, I know, she said, my mother, who died giving birth to me. She never recovered from the slaver's abuse. But Panu, what has this to do with my purpose on Thalos? The Black Sword sang to me. I am here at its bidding. How can you ask me that? Panu rubbed at his forehead. Your father is friend bonded to me, so I will be forced to endure his pain. And Panu shook his head. This is a critical time for this world. I cannot be distracted by your father's heart. Again he paused. What if I transfer you home? Avalar felt her chest turn cold, her blood to brittle ice. Do that, and I will break from your grasp and fall. Then you can tell my father that, how your actions slew me. Panu stood with his eyes half-lidded. Seated as she was, his head came to her chest. She could feel the heat from his body, the soothing pocket of warmth he created around them both. The sword's lore of Tyrdawn is a beautiful dance, he said, but it is not the way of giants, and it cannot stop Erebos. As Panu thought aloud, Avalar saw bursts of lightning reflect in his eyes from across the sea. Only power can defeat a warder. Erebos is a warder who knows this very well, so he hides, gaining strength in his mountain. The others trapped here with him? The elf sighed. He's already slain Tythos and Halram. Panu flashed her a glance. To face Erebos, he would need to get a lot stronger. She watched him intently as he rubbed at his chin. From the bunch and release of the muscles across his forehead, she could almost see his quick mind work. Tyrdawn is near my home, giant. Look. Startled by this change, Avalar shifted sideways when Panu knelt, giving him room to poke his finger into the rocky sand. With careful strokes, he drew a curved line in a circle, his exposed and slender arm dripping with rain. If you head west, Panu said, you'll find where the Shamath River spills into the sea. Beside the falls, there is a stairway carved into the cliff. Climb it. When you reach the top, follow the river. It will take you through the mountains to this point. Panu tapped the circle he had dug, its thin line filling with water. A lake called Krenath. Turn east then along the shore. There is a trail to Tyrdawn that begins. He buried his thumb in a clump of tiny pebbles. Here. The pinions of his wings rustled as he stood. If you must make this journey, you will go the way I tell you, he said. This route is the safest path I know over the Snarl-tooths. He hesitated, studying her face as if to gauge her reaction. Now then, I want you to answer me this, he said severely. It is the one question that your leader Trenter asks all warriors to answer before they leave for the north. What 3 things on this world will slay you? Avalar, peering downward, watched as the rainwater flattened out his map. A Shirkan raider, she said, for he values his blood sport above all else. Correct, Panu nodded. What next? A human, she replied, for he will crave power. Indeed, said Panu. While there are no raiders here on Thalos, there are many humans. Beware of them, Avalar. They will kill whatever they fear. She met his troubled stare. The 3rd thing is what I am, she said. A giant, for she will give her life to protect the weak. Your people face extinction, said Panu. You can no longer afford to protect the vulnerable. You will keep to this path of doing what the sword wants and nothing more. Scowling, he glared at the sea. This feels wrong, he muttered. I cannot. With a grimace, he continued, there are other ways to prove your worth, giant. The Sunderkhan are raiding again near Kadath. You're old enough now and trained. I will convince your father to allow you to fight. No. Avalar milked the sea from her thick blonde braid. I am not here to prove my worth. Gavorian's glaive quickened the blood of my people. It gave them the strength to rebel. Yet still we are not free. Because of this, the sword is uneasy. It will not rest until I do as it bids. Lowering her head, she stared at the water trickling down her arms. I have come to find freedom for giants, to remind my people of what they are. Until I do, they will remain as slaves, controlled by their fear. Panu, his brow furrowed, licked at his lips. Talankai will fail without its magic, he said, and without your people to anchor it down. What if you should die, Avalar? There are not enough giants as it is. Avalar, breathing deeply, studied his concern. Now it is you who has forgotten what I am, she teased. As a giant, I have the world defending me. She smiled, watching as his violet eyes flared. You asked me before why I failed to stop the storm. Mayhap I craved the challenge of it, Panu. He snorted and glanced at the sky, the purple diagonal slash of rain across the horizon. That would be like you, he admitted. But no amount of courage is enough, nor is the weather's protection or your skill with the sword. In case you have not noticed, your supplies are missing, Avalar. Here. Panu confronted the thundering surf and opened his strong white wings. Briskly he clapped his hands twice, and she gasped when her stores appeared, tangled in glistening seaweed, beside her. The packs were heavy with brine, she noted, bloated with pockets of air and covered with algae. Yet still she could spot her sword underneath the bundle, her rolled shelter beside it. Your provisions were submerged under the wreckage, Panu said. With his toe he prodded the soggy tangle. If the foodstuffs are spoiled, I will fetch you more. I will not have you starving, giant. Avalar struggled to her knees. In every muscle she felt bruised and sore. The rain hammered against the wet fabric of her tunic as she bent over the pile. Bracing the first sack against her thighs, she fumbled with its knots. I use reef bulbs, she said. They do not hold as much, but, looking up, she smiled. It was a trick my Uncle Kirk taught me. Do you see? She withdrew a hard blue sphere from the sack and shook it. The bulbs are proof against water. Behold. With her thumb she pried it open. The insides are still dry. Panu's white elfin brows arched toward his hairline. As she replaced the bulb among the others, Avalar watched the frown return to his ageless face. Your uncle's knowledge serves you well, he said, though I doubt Kurgan Rock would approve of your presence here. Avalar drew a shuddering breath, and sighing, she stumbled to her feet. I thank you for my life, Panu. He grunted. I didn't save it so you could stand out here and freeze, he said. Come now, giant. There is a small cave half a league down this beach. If you follow me this way, I will show you. No. Her teeth chattered as she slung the first pack over her shoulder. Most of her stores she would leave behind. She had packed them only for the sea. I will find it myself. She turned in the direction he pointed. The sodden bundle thudded against her shoulder as she stopped to meet his stare. I have been protected all my life, Panu. This I will do alone. Panu glanced at a jumble of boulders beside the cliff. With 2 running steps, he launched himself, flying to land on the icy rocks. Flaring his feathered wings for balance, he bent at the waist and thrust his hand downward between 2 large slabs. Avalar squinted, staring through the storm, struggling to focus on the crystal staff he plucked from the stones. A flash of gray exploded from the gap. The lean-bodied creature, scolding furiously, leaped at Panu's boot. Avalar, blinking water from her lashes, watched it climb. She recognized Samson, the agile little beast the elf kept as his companion. Panu tilted his head, and with his free hand prodded the ferret up to his shoulder. Calmly he faced her then, his violet eyes gleaming. You'll see me again, giant, when you are ready. Avalar blinked. With a movement too swift to follow, Panu transferred, removing himself from her sight. Already the pocket of warmth he had created cooled against her cheek, and the sleet pounded harder still. Sails, she whispered. She was alone.